Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome and thank you for participating in today's meeting for the South Coast Air Quality Management District. If attending in person, please do not connect to Zoom or teleconference while in the room. To prevent disruptions, please silence all devices. All participants on Zoom, except board members and South Coast AQMD staff, will be placed on mute. You will not be able to mute or unmute your line manually. After each agenda item, public comment will be taken. If you are participating on Zoom and wish to comment, please click on the raise hand button. If you are participating by phone and wish to comment, please dial *9. When it is your turn to speak, your name will be called. For phone participants, your name or part of your phone number will be called, and when it is your turn, and the host will unmute your line. Speakers may be limited to a total of 3 minutes or less for all items on the agenda. Following the meeting agenda items, a general public comment period is allowed to provide the public an opportunity to speak on any items not on the agenda. During the general public comment period, speakers may be limited to 3 minutes or less. The amount of time to comment may be shortened to ensure all speakers can be heard. A countdown timer will be displayed on the screen for each public comment. For questions or issues related to making public comment, please call the public advisor at 909-396-3247. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can we get roll call? Any opening remarks? I don't have any, but.
Okay, so we'll start off. Board member Veronica Padilla-Campos. We know that she's running a little behind today, but she is planning on being here. Senator Vanessa Delgado is not able to attend today. Board member Kurt Hagman.
Here.
Thank you. Board member Jose Luis Solache.
Present.
Mayor Elizabeth Alcantar. Rita Alexander. Manuel Arredondo. Angie Valveras. Dr. Lawrence Beeson.
Present.
Thank you. Susan Bilodeau. Paul Choi. Carrie Doi. Dr. Afid El Hassan. Mary Figueroa. Angela Garcia. Kareem Kangora. Ana Gonzalez. Dr. Monique Hernandez. Dr. Jill Johnston. Humberto Lugo. David McNeil. Donald Smith. And Rafael Yanes.
Thank you. So we don't have a quorum, so we'll pass on our action on the approval minutes on item 1. Any staff review and follow-up action items, discussion item number 2.
Sure. Thank you very much, Supervisor. The first item is Board Member Padilla-Campos asked if there was a calendar of events, and we provided that on February 14th. Chair Delgado requested a future update from staff regarding rendering plants, and this item is going to be heard today and during EJAG. Rafael Yanes requested an update on the transportation rulemaking by CARB. CARB will be present, is to be present at the August meeting. And then lastly, Board Member Padilla-Campos asked if South Coast AQMD will be taking a stance on an EPA back measure regarding airport emissions and jet fuel, and staff is discussing this with the executive officer. And eventually we will, if we move forward on it, we'll take it to one of the board committees, and that's it.
Thank you, Derek. Move on to discussion items. Well, is any public comments? I don't think there is any more input on that. So Discussion items, item 3, California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA guidance, and South Coast AQMD rules from Barbara.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Barbara Radline. I'm the program supervisor of the CEQA lead agency team. Thank you for inviting me to present today on my favorite topic, hopefully yours, CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act, and South Coast AQMD's roles in implementing that act. Next slide, please, Paul. Okay, one more, please. Okay, so what is CEQA? CEQA is the premier environmental justice law in California. It was adopted in 1970. Fun fact, that was Governor Ronald Reagan was the one who signed it into law. At the same time, President Nixon had created the EPA and adopted the Federal Clean Air Act. So 1970 was a bump in year for environmental justice. The CEQA guidelines and the statute are codified in the Public Resources Code. And this handy book, that's the 2023 version. I have the 2022 version with me, but this is everything that we rely on to implement CEQA at our agency. For environmental justice, the legislature said it really well, so that's why I put this quote up here: to ensure the long-term protection of the environment, consistent with the provision of decent home and suitable living environment for every California. And that should be the guiding doctrine for making public decisions. Next slide, please. So there are two primary CEQA goals: disclosure and minimizing environmental impacts. Disclosure is best described to help government agencies make an informed decision, and also to allow public participation. Without those two prongs, there is no input. It's just there's a veiled decision making going on. And so CEQA is really meant to fully disclose all the things that are going on with the project and what the environmental impacts will be, and so that we can focus on the potentially significant impacts to minimize them, either to mitigate or avoid them, or apply mitigation measures, so that when we approve a project, that it is causes the least significant damage as possible. Next slide, please. So CEQA helps inform government decision makers like our governing board and the public of the potential significant effects of projects, and it identifies ways to reduce, avoid, or mitigate those impacts. And the whole point of it is to reduce or prevent environmental damage, especially significant environmental damage. Now, if there are significant impacts, CEQA requires alternatives to the project proposal to be analyzed, so that you can balance whether the alternative is a more desirable project than the original idea that's proposed. Now, CEQA does have a goal to balance public interest and to disclose why a project is approved, even if there are significant unavoidable impacts. Case in point, we have our air quality management plan. We are the agency that's in control of regulating air pollution and trying to achieve the federal clean air goals with EPA. But at the same time, to do that, there's a lot of construction that's involved. And so those construction activities can cause short-term construction impacts that are significant. But our governing board still feels that the AQMD, the benefits outweigh those short-term environmental impacts during construction. So overall, CEQA, once you get through the process of it, it will disclose to the public why a project was approved. Next slide, please. So when does CEQA apply? Activities that require discretionary approval. So discretionary approval is when you're exercising judgment and you're deliberating. So that's what our governing board does all the time. When we look at our monthly agendas, there are things that they discuss, and they decide whether or not to approve a project, usually for rule projects, and then for our air quality management plan, of course. And a project is an activity where there's either a direct physical change in the environment or a reasonably foreseeable indirect change in the environment. And so the CEQA guidelines provides a very specific definition on discretionary. And so I put that in there just for your edification. I won't read through it, but it's when you have to actually deliberate to make a decision. It's not a rubber stamped decision. Next slide, please. So example of projects subject to CEQA for our agency in particular is rural development projects. Every month you'll see on the agenda that there'll be a proposed amended rule or proposed rule, and that's a project that's subject to CEQA. And we also have our air quality management plan, but there are other plans that are subject to CEQA, like general plans and master plans, which are more common for land use agencies like the City of Los Angeles, the County of Los Angeles. Now, another role that we have as a regulatory agency is that we issue air permits. And it's very common to have CEQA triggered for large industrial construction projects. So whether it's new construction or equipment modifications of facilities, but it can be for a large refinery or utility, as well as a gas station or a spray booth. So air permits are required, and we have a process for screening those applications that come in. We have a 400 CEQA form. And that helps identify the level of CEQA review so that our engineers can ascertain what level of construction, if any, would be required and whether or not a CEQA document would be needed. Land use projects are also subject to CEQA. Now, South Coast AQMD is not a land use agency, like the County of Los Angeles, City of Los Angeles, Orange County, San Bernardino, Riverside, they all have planning departments, and they evaluate the new construction and modifications of buildings for residential, commercial, retail use. Air permits are not typically required, but those planning departments are also required to evaluate these projects under CEQA. Next slide, please. Okay, so we have 3 roles under CEQA. We're lead agency, we're responsible agency, and we're commenting agency. Next slide, please. So the lead agency, that's when we have primary oversight, legal responsibility for conducting CEQA review over a project. And the evaluation covers all environmental topic areas, not just air quality. So that would range from a suite of topics from aesthetics to transportation, wildfires, hydrology, water quality, hazardous materials. There's a checklist that we rely on to make sure that we're evaluating all the environmental topic areas. And we go through that exercise for rule development projects, plan development projects, as well as for air permits when no land use approval is needed, but we still have to evaluate the permit application and impose permit conditions, which may include imposing mitigation measures to reduce air quality impacts or other impacts. The CEQA process needs to be complete, however, before we can issue any permits. Next slide, please. Now, as responsible agency, it's very similar to lead agency, except that we don't have the primary oversight. Air permits are still involved. The lead agency will coordinate with us, and we will coordinate with the lead agency on the contents of the air quality analysis that's in the CEQA document. So they will consult with us before a CEQA document is even released for public review and comment. And we will contribute to the development of the air quality analysis. We will provide comments on mitigation measures, especially during early construction. And we will get a second chance to review the CEQA document when the lead agency releases it for public review and comment. They will send it back to our agency, and during that public comment period, we are invited to review it again and to submit formal comments if necessary. We try not to do that because we like to think that the initial consultation with the lead agency will address all of our concerns, but if necessary, we can send additional comments so that the final CEQA document has all the elements that it needs to align with the project description so that we can issue the air permits that are covered by the project. Now, if the CEQA document has significant impacts, we are required as responsible agency to make findings on those impacts. And so that'll be an extra step that happens when it's time to issue the air permits. Paul, next slide, please. Okay. So our third role is when we are commenting agency. Now that's when we review documents that are prepared by other agencies. I have a sister team in CEQA. It's called CEQA IGR team. It stands for Intergovernmental Review. And that's when agencies prepare CEQA documents for projects in their areas where air permits aren't required, but they send them to us for us to review and comment, if necessary, on the air quality analysis and its adequacy, and whether the mitigation measures are appropriate and sufficient for the impacts that are identified relative to the air quality analysis. Now, for commenting agency review, just to remind the audience that we don't have land use authority over those projects. So we can write a comment letter, and they are required under the CEQA guidelines to log that letter, include that in the final CEQA document, and prepare a written response to our comments. Now, we have a website where we keep all of the comment letters that we submit for IGR review. We've been putting them on our website since about 2009, and it's a really small font there, but it's also in your paper handout of the presentation. And if you're curious to look at those letters, you can go to that webpage and view the comment letters. Also monthly at the governing board meetings, there's a standing agenda of lead agency projects environmental documents received, and that shows the statistics of how many how many CEQA documents we received to review and which projects we commented on. And it also has an attachment C within that board letter that identifies the lead agency projects that are with us for review. Next slide, please. So as commenting agency, our review focuses on whether the air quality impacts are adequately identified and analyzed, and that they align with what the project description is. We want to make sure that feasible mitigation measures are applied for both construction and for operation. And we want to try our best to give constructive feedback to minimize those significant adverse air quality impacts, if any. Now, we don't always prepare comments on CEQA documents that we review, but when we do, we like I said, we put them on our website, and we receive responses to those from the lead agency. Next slide, please. Okay, so some examples of mitigation measures that we will suggest in a comment letter often pertain to construction activities, and so we will regularly suggest to use electronic or alternative fueled construction equipment, non-diesel, to avoid emissions of toxic diesel particulate matter, the use of 2014 and newer haul trucks, to use equipment that has a Tier 4 engine or better for off-road construction equipment, and for long-range projects that span several years, we like to recommend a commitment to zero emission and near zero emission technologies. For warehouse projects, we have a lot of warehouse projects that we've seen in the Moreno Valley, and we also have tailored mitigation measures specific to warehouse projects. Similar to the construction activities, we like to see the requirement built into the project design for the future use of zero emission and near zero emission heavy duty trucks for future development, and to provide overnight truck parking inside the warehouse area so that to limit the parking and any idling outside of the property line and near sensor receptors. We also like to recommend to design check-in points for trucks inside the project site to keep trucks from queuing outside the property. Next slide, please. So this is just a very crowded slide, and apologize for the small font, but we just wanted to highlight a few noteworthy projects that we've commented on. They range from different lead agencies, as you can see, from the Moreno Valley to the DTSC. We comment on whether an air permit is required. Sometimes we'll get a CEQA document that says no air permits are required. And actually, when we review it, we discover that no, an air permit's required for a backup generator. And we'll send a comment letter saying, well, we're actually responsible agency for this project. And so that will flag the lead agencies so that they will be in regular communication with us as for the status of the CEQA document, because if a permit is involved, we can't issue the permit until the CEQA document is certified by the lead agency. Next slide, please. So this is just a summary slide of our three roles. I won't read it. It basically hits all the highlights. I know I only have 10 minutes, so I'm trying to make it snappy. Next slide, please. So the other thing that our agency does is we develop CEQA policy from time to time. And right now we're in the process of having several working group meetings to develop cumulative impacts guidance on air toxics for projects. We've had 3 working groups so far, and we're discussing potential concepts and a tiered approach for enhancing a qualitative and quantitative review for cumulative impacts. So when you have a project, that's the individual project and their effects, but we also want to make sure that where the project is located, that it's taking into the account of other projects in the area so that we don't ignore the accumulation of other impacts, especially with toxic emissions from other facilities nearby. So the next steps for this policy development is we're going to continue the working group meetings. I think we're looking to announce soon that we're going to have another meeting in May. And we'll be putting updates on our CEQA policy development webpage, and we also send out an email blast. So if you're interested, you can join us for those meetings. Next slide, please. We have a CEQA webpage, so we keep all of our CEQA resources in one tidy area. So we have the CEQA documents that we've issued for rural projects, for permit projects, as well as all the comment letters that we send on IGR review. The policy documents are on there. There's our CEQA significance thresholds for air quality, for mass dailies, for localized significance thresholds. We have a link to the CaliMod land use model, which helps planners calculate emissions for construction projects, and so that they can use that to incorporate into their CEQA documents. Again, the link there to the governing board agenda item, which is a monthly item that gives a status on all of our lead agency projects. And if you want to receive CEQA updates in particular, we have the sign up page, and there's some CEQA boxes that you can check to make sure that you get those email blasts from us. Next slide, please. So there's my contact information, and my colleague for the CEQA IGR program is Sam Wong. He's not available. He wasn't available to be here today, but he is available to answer any future questions that may come up if you have specific ones relative to the IGR program. Thank you so much for your kind attention. That concludes my presentation.
I will make a comment, then pass it back off to our chair. Dealing with CEQA for 20 some odd years in a government role from different levels, from city council to legislature now here. This is one of the better actual presentations where it's actually a very nice concise presentation that I can share with my residents, because it is a confusing thing out there. What does this mean? Does it mean you can't have environmental impacts? No, it means you take a look at them and try to mitigate them the best you can within practical reason. And we take the lead agency role as a county quite a bit, and I did as a city council as well. And so this is a great presentation. I just want to give you kudos for it.
Thank you for the compliment.
Thank you for assisting and moving the meeting along. My apologies for being late. It's good to be here. I understand we still don't have quorum, so we didn't. We weren't able to vote on the minutes, but thank you for that presentation. Are there any other questions from other board members? Oh, I saw a lot of hands go up. How should we do this? How do we normally do?
Cards up, you have questions.
And I don't know names by heart. Can you help me? Sarah? All right, right on.
this.
Thanks.
There we go. Hi, thank you. So question, in regards to one of the examples that you used, for instance, well, there's 2 questions really. One, how is the lead agency determined? Is it the state agency in most cases? For instance, if a local city is applying for a permit, and it's just for my own personal edification, of course, who would be the overarching and ruling agency in that case, or lead agency in that case?
So the lead agency is decided when it's based on the primary responsibility for overseeing the project. And sometimes there are 2 agencies involved. We've had a situation where between the city of Carson and South Coast, and in those situations, we've met with them to decide who wants to be lead agency. Sometimes, there's benefits or pros and cons to taking the lead agency role. And ultimately, it's about how many approvals are required and what's really involved. So it's hard to give you a solid answer when it comes to a state agency versus a city. But usually it's whoever has the primary approval authority.
Okay, so it gets voted on, right?
It's not a vote, it's a discussion. The CEQA guidelines does have some guidance, and the lawyers do tend to get involved to decide who's best to.
Got it. Yeah, because and I had my own projects, being the city, and it's like, okay, so who is the agency that will oversee us, right? I mean, even though we're undertaking the project, we're actually performing the work. It becomes, all right, who do I send this request for permit out to? That kind of stuff. So
Right.
that's the one. And then on the second, so in one of the examples you used, for instance, some of the recommendations that were made were the use of Tier 4 equipment during offsite construction. Now, it's kind of been one of my, irks, if you will, and trying to really understand where we are in terms of, the Clean Air Act and the adoption of Tier 4 final type of regulations when it comes to diesel and diesel, mitigating diesel particulates in particular, and how it affects the, EJ communities. So the question becomes is, again, with off-road as well as rail, thank God that, CARB is really moving forward and pushing for that newly announced legislation, moving towards hopefully, zero emission type of locomotive traffic. But are we in Tier 4 final now, finally, for all classes of diesel engines?
I'm not sure if I could speak to that. I know that it depends on the inventory. It depends on the equipment, because there's a lot of construction equipment out there, and the people who provide the equipment to rent it out, there are Tier 4 and Tier 4 plus, depending on the equipment category. But if you've got several construction projects going on at one time, and depending on who they're renting their equipment from.
Right, there's
So-
Tier 3s out there that might still be lingering, and Tier 2s, and same is true of locomotives. And that's one of the reasons why I think CARB is really moving forward in trying to pass that 23-year-old legislation by 2030. And that's one of the main issues that we face in all EJ communities, is these old pieces of equipment that should be retired. Thank you.
Councilmember Solache.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, Jose Luis Solache. I'm one of the newest board members here at AQMD, representing 51 cities, mainly in the Southeast, South Bay, coastal cities. So just happy to be part of this committee. Just wanted to just formally say hi to all of you. My input to this, and I think I can't agree with enough with the Supervisor Kurt Hagman on the perspective from a local agency angle, city council, that we deal with some of these issues at the local level. One thing that I do want to kind of put in everyone's radar, and I don't need maybe an answer today, or just even from my colleagues on this committee, there's a lot in the same spaces that Kirk and I sit on. There's a lot of conversations about CEQA reform. And so I bring that up as a, what does that look like, right? And I post a question as a just how open-ended. I'm not trying to get an answer today from this committee or some of my colleagues here, but I would love to definitely engage all of you as we all sit in different boards and committees. And what does that look like? Is that something that's needed after 50 plus years now that it was first instituted? And what does that reform look like, to specifically to this space in this conversation? So I would be intrigued to just learn from all of you as time goes to the next couple of weeks and months, and that I sit on this committee and serve on AQMD. I would love to just engage all of you on an individual basis and just kind of get your feedback, because these conversations are happening around us. And so obviously this is a very in tune group with the EJ community and what that looks like from an environmental justice. But I definitely would like to just, as time, if time permits, engage you all individually on what that looks like and what does that really mean to this space of group. So thank you, and I'm looking forward to hopefully being part of this conversation and how we impact our local communities.
Yeah,
Thank you.
if I could just partially answer your question, because I can't fully answer it, but every year in the legislature, there's always CEQA legislation to, whether it be clean it up or get exemptions. I think the one latest exemption that was given that I'm aware of is a new Clipper stadium, the new Clipper arena, right? And that's down in Inglewood. And I know there was one for the proposed stadium in downtown. But every year, you know, at least from the legislative side here at the district, is we're always looking at how are things going to affect us as a regulatory agency. And CEQA is always one of them that we're looking at the legislation being introduced and see if we need to engage on it.
And Mr. La Torre, you hit something that I always see as a hot topic in the legislature in different spaces of conversations is exceptions, right? And that's really one of the things I just want to get feedback, because, you know, one of the frustrating parts is we make exceptions for stadiums and things that are happening, but yet we have a huge housing crisis in California. And, you know, these things are being had. So again, that's what kind of, without getting into the weeds of the issue itself, I think you hit the nail on the head where why are we making exceptions and another space that we might need to consider, right? I'm not advocating in either side. I'm just asking from the holistic approach of what does CEQA look like today, then it, you know, and then that would look like, you know, 50 years ago. So I just want to put that into context of these are real conversations, and you know, we collectively as a society making our state as exceptions for stadiums. And what does that really mean for the future of CEQA and and what it's meant to do? So again, I can't thank you enough for the presentation. Thank you, Mr. La Torre.
So I just wanted to add one, is that I'm not sure if everyone's aware, it's called the Little Hoover Commission. But the Little Hoover Commission has been, at the state level, has been holding a number of hearings specifically on CEQA and talking about a variety of different topics related to CEQA. So maybe we can provide the link to everybody on that so they can kind of take a look at that.
Dr. Al Hassan, did you have a question?
I did. Thank you very much. It's nice to see everyone in person, by the way. None of you've aged. Very good. Okay. Good job. Two questions, actually. The first one is, does CEQA have jurisdiction over or any input on water projects or water management projects in the state?
Absolutely. Hydrology and water quality is one of the key environmental topic areas that's evaluated. So even when we're lead agency, we have to evaluate hydrology and water quality impacts. Say, for example, if there's equipment that uses water, it's an air pollution control device called the scrubber, and it uses a lot of water. We have to analyze the impacts of that as the water demand as well as the wastewater that's generated.
And, you know, an important point was brought up about housing, and I appreciate you bringing that up. We tend in general to deal with the here and now and the current impacts now. And I know AQMD has done a very good job of trying to look forward in terms of the impacts of projects moving forward. When we give exemptions, when we, for certain things, you know, building a stadium, things like that, do we think what's going to happen in areas that might be open desert, open fields, just open farmland 20, 30 years from now, in terms of our just anticipating what may be going through those areas or the impact to possible populations that may spring up in those areas?
So the exemptions that are in the CEQA guidelines are promulgated by our state legislature. So that's not something that we do as an agency. And open field land use issues are again, that's South Coast doesn't have jurisdiction over those decisions. But when there is a development, say out in the high desert for solar fields or windmills, or, that kind of thing. Anytime there's from the ground level up development, a CEQA document would be required unless there's some specific carved out exemption that the legislature adopted.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And being from the legislature is when it's the pet project, the leadership of the legislature that wants to carve it out, not the whole.
It was funny you say that because I was in Sacramento on Wednesday and we were up there for one of our bills was being heard in committee on the Senate side. And when I arrived there, there was probably easily 300 carpenters members. And that's the other influential one. Then they were actually talking about housing and making it easier to build housing. They were supporting the bill up there, but you're right. There's a lot of when the powers that be want things have to happen, they want it done their way.
Unfortunately, too much of the governance of California is political by nature, which is refreshing to come back down to local government where there's no red and blue lines or anything like that. You may have different opinions with your colleagues, but it's basically following the rules that's set. And I've been out of there for 9 years now in my current role, but I was going to say, there needs to be more education of your legislators. So please take every opportunity to go up there. As a 3-termer up there, there's a lot of things I was voting on that I didn't really have the background I needed. And I was calling my local agencies, my school districts, my cities, my other partners saying, hey, what do you think about this bill? Otherwise, you take the leadership's or consensus of staff's view on things where really is, and I think there's also, I think agencies like CARB here and others can say, okay, here's a review of the legislation you passed 5 years ago. Was that the original intent? And we really don't do that. I passed 42 bills into law myself, and there's no opportunity for me to go back. Did they actually have the intent I wanted to do? Or did it have ripple effects to other legislations, other codes? And that's how you come up with bureaucracy, because no one goes back and cleans out the old stuff. We just keep putting layer and layer of laws on top. And that's kind of how CEQA has evolved. It was a very simple document to begin with. And Ronald Reagan proposed it. It was, hey, if there's environmental impact, try to mitigate it. And over that 40, 50 years now it is what it has almost stifled California from development because it is very complex, very layers and layers and layers of laws and things. And that's why the bigger projects go to the legislature and say, hey, we don't want to spend 5 years going through a CEQA document on the stadium. You guys can pass this in 3 months. It's going to look good for you, for your district. Go do it. And they do it, which is sad for the rest of the smaller builders and smaller projects that we all have to deal with in local government. That's my commentary for today. Sorry.
Any other questions?
I have a comment because on the policy development, I know considering cumulative impacts is new. They didn't do that before. And I think it's a big win that's part of it now. And you mentioned these working groups that are happening. Have any of the 3 happened yet?
Yes, we've held 3 so far.
Oh, you've
and
had
the
3.
presentations are on our website.
Okay.
CEQA has always required an analysis of cumulative impacts. This is a nuance of air toxics cumulative impacts. And so it's very difficult when you have one facility that might be using chrome, and then you have another facility nearby that's using a different chemical, and they each have different cancer risks or acute impacts. And to ascertain what the overall impact would be cumulatively if you put another project in the middle of that. And so this guidance that we're working on developing is trying to lay out a methodical procedure for how CEQA documents can analyze the air toxics cumulative impacts of a project.
Okay, I thought I remembered that in our advocacy, we had a problem with the fact that it didn't do exactly what you just said, by putting this 3rd project. How is that really impacting? It may not have an impact alone, but when you think about what's already going on, what is the true impact? So I thought that was fairly new. And my question was like, who is the audience for these meetings? I'm just curious who attends them and who are you hearing feedback from for these meetings?
So we have a lot of CEQA practitioners, so consultants, and then also different agencies as well as representatives from DTSC and OEHA. I don't have the full list in
So
front of
not-
me, but I can,
Mhm.
if you're curious, I can get you the.
Yeah,
some
I'm just
key
wondering
names.
if there's environmental groups, if there's
Absolutely.
community groups that are also attending. I would just be very curious because this is important. It's big,
It's-
so I'm just curious.
Yeah, it's been an exciting development, and there's been a lot of participation, emails back and forth of suggestions. If you get a chance to look at the various presentations, you'll
Yeah.
see how the discussions have progressed so far.
That'd be great. And I guess that the link that you provided, if we click that, we can also get notices of when the upcoming meetings are.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm gonna do that. Thank you so much.
Great. We'd love to have you.
Angie, you have a question?
Hi, Angela Garcia. Nice to finally meet you all in person. I just want to like piggyback on the question that, Rafael Yanis had said. I was actually surprised that, AQMD has been a lead agency in projects. But my comment is, have you ever been CEQA challenged by any environmental community groups on your analysis on greenhouse effects?
On greenhouse gas specifically, I
And-
don't recall, but we have been challenged on CEQA documents before. We've had a challenge. Probably the most recent challenge we had was on the Tesoro Lyric, the merging of the BP Carson refinery with the Tesoro Wilmington refinery. And so Earth Justice was involved with that, and CBE, I believe.
And
It wasn't specific just to greenhouse gases, though.
And so most of the time they're looking at particulates and how the air emissions and impacts are. How often are those comments really, because they're challenging some of the calculations and how the models were conducted. How often are those really accurate to when they make those comments?
As far as accuracy, I mean, we try to follow very standard methodologies with all of our CEQA projects for permits, and as well as for our rural development projects. And so if there's a challenge on the methodology, I haven't really experienced that per se. I don't think that a judge, if there's enough evidence in the record, I don't think a judge is going to say, well, the way you calculated this is wrong versus another way to do it. I think I don't want to step into too much legal territory, because I'm looking at Daphne here next to me and she's giving me side eye. But usually with the cases that I've been involved with, they were more about challenging the rule itself and the requirements, or whether or not we analyzed a particular impact properly, not so much the method
Okay.
of the analysis, if that.
Yeah,
If that
that's
helps.
really my question, because I just wonder how often you get challenged on your CEQA analysis when it goes out to public comment.
Very rarely. I'm proud to say, very rarely.
Oh, good. Congratulations. Thank you.
Sorry, just drawing a blank. Oh, so with respects to when you guys meet in committee in analyzing the cumulative impacts into like a particular community, especially when you're reviewing for a new project, there comes a point where you start having saturation. So there's a saturation point in the area. At what point do you guys go back and present your findings back to the rule writing or the permitting group in order to re-permit some of those facilities so that the cumulative impact can be mitigated in some way? So for instance, if I'm going to take, for instance, Boyle Heights, and we just recently had a presentation on chrome plating facilities, or and so there was a cluster that has been found, and so and of course the workshop was on rule writing and the new rule implementation for the Chrome 6 And so I'm just, as an advocate for the residents in and around that area, at what point do you say, okay, well, this facility, their permit expires in such and such time? At what point do you guys get them up to speed on their permits? Because I've seen a lot of permits that are grandfathered in and not really addressed. And so again, going back to that cumulative analysis of the various toxins, that those findings should go back to the permitting and the rules committees, and just, make them aware, hey, we've reached a saturation point in this particular community. Any new and upcoming, permit that are up for renewal, we should take a look at this in order to make them comply with current rules.
Barbara, hi.
Oh,
I
Kraus,
said-
you wanna talk in? Okay, go
Yeah.
ahead.
Yeah, you bet. I was going to say good morning, but no, it's afternoon already. Good afternoon. I know I'm on the screen instead of there in person. My name is Mike Kraus. I'm an assistant deputy executive officer in planning and rules. I have a lot of secret experience myself, having been worked at the agency in that secret team for about 15 years. But to answer that question, it's a really great question, actually. And I think that's the reason why we're really focused on looking at that cumulative toxics analysis and trying to structure a real good solid policy for folks out there, for those practitioners out there, to do just what you're saying. Are we at a saturation point when it comes to these local industries or facilities and what have you, that are kind of building around each other and creating, this kind of like toxic hotspots almost, right? And then, how do you analyze it? What do you do? How do you mitigate it? And to give the tools to those decision makers, like Barbara noted, which is what CEQA is, to make those decisions, right? Again, we're not a land use agency. We don't make those decisions, but we want to make sure that the policies that they're deciding on are well informed. Right. When it comes to the permitting, as you know, it's a kind of a complex structure. We create rules. We go back and revisit rules as new technology comes onto play. We want to create new policy. We want our rules to be the strongest and the most stringent. When we issue permits, they issue the permits based upon compliance with those stringent rules and regulations that are set. The permitting group itself doesn't, in and of itself, necessarily dictate those. They do follow what the rules are set, but we do go back and periodically revisit the rules again and strengthen them along the way. When a permit is issued, as Barbara noted, it cannot be issued unless the CEQA process is completed, right? And so it puts them back into that CEQA cycle. And again, that's why we want to create policies. So when the CEQA is done, it's being done to the best of its ability, mitigating any of those impacts. So folks are not required necessarily to come in if they have an existing permit until they want to modify and change something. And then it becomes open for evaluation. I hope that answered that.
It kind of does, but Michael, if you can, maybe, again, so what I'm recommending is, as communities come into a saturation point, that the permitting and the rule writing, groups, they be made aware of that. And so I think moving forward, look, the fact that you guys, your third meeting, you guys completed your third meeting. Now we're just trying to I'm trying to help steer this in a very productive way, to where I know you guys are just looking at CEQA in general, but now I'm taking that one step further and saying, because you guys are generating a lot, or gathering a lot of good information from the various testing and all that other stuff that they're required through CEQA anyways. But now, what I'm saying is taking that to the next level and just going back to the rule and permitting groups and just advising them, hey, look, we're, this particular community is like getting to a saturation point. And San Bernardino is another, San Bernardino, Muscoy. Again, all the AB 617 communities, the EJs that, we're really targeting in the first year groups, places like Wilmington and North Long Beach, because they have a lot of activity currently going on with port development, the local rail yards and all these industries that are coming and to the board member, Kurt, to his point, we have the legislature now issuing exemptions to the normal process for pet projects. And so again, we need to take a holistic look at things and where we can. And I think that would be a good place to do so. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the comments, questions, and for the department. What's that? Oh, I see one more. I'm sorry.
Sorry for being late this morning. I ran into a big traffic accident. So the line was about 20 miles long. So finally, I started out at 9 o'clock in the morning and it took me this time to get here. Sorry about that. I just wanted to say that ever since I've been here and a member of this advisory committee, I've been impressed by the work of the AQMD staff, their dedication, all your information that you have provided has been very helpful, especially speaking for my area, which is the desert area, the Coachella Valley. And with AB 617 and us having a program down there, and AQMD doing a fantastic job out there, I think. Things are really moving, things are happening, but it's just so much work to be done. And one of the things I have a little bit of time to now start working on is there's an area in the middle of Indio and the property is owned by the county and the city. And I mean, there's CEQ districts that, and I'm sure they give themselves a pass on some of the things, but every time, especially when we have strong winds, their empty areas are, they produce a lot of particles in the air, I think. And I would be very interested in finding out what are those particles that are out there in that area that are being blown up, because you have that area, especially when we had COVID in 2020, that area around there, that's where the biggest number of people getting sick from COVID, and also more deaths than any area in India were from that particular surrounding area. And I know it's mostly apartments and low income housing. And and I guess that's why nobody really complains. And there's, but those three big parcels of land, one was going to be it's right behind the mall, which is not doing very well. They were going to expand, so they tore down all the housing that was there, moved the people out, and they just left a big empty, I would say about maybe 10 acres of land. And so there's, and the county, the fairgrounds, they still got a section there that still's got the dust there blows immensely, and when there are strong winds. So I know it's hard because there's dust coming from everywhere, but in that particular area, the thing that brought to my attention this area was the fact that we had concerns from the public there who they realized that there were a lot of them were getting sick during the COVID, and then they started to look at that, what's causing this, and so I would like to see if maybe AQMD could put a monitoring device out there in that area, because you could probably locate it in an area where all three parcels, because they basically surround this area of low cost housing and apartments, and it's near the fairgrounds. And so the thing is that it would be because you really can't do anything unless you have the data to back it up. It could be just a coincidence, it could be nothing to it. It just probably it could be a normal thing, but people are concerned and they are wondering. Did I go off? Oh, there it is. Why did the area had so many? And basically those were for the first cases came up in that area as well as COVID area. So, and I know that it's a big concern, and I would like to see if maybe we could get somebody from QMD. I could talk to someone or see if we I haven't gone to the city or the county yet directly because I'm involved in so many things that I don't want to get them all wound up and worried about what I'm doing. But the thing is that it is something that people that would like to see something looked at and maybe get the data so we can come up with some facts. And it could be, like I said, nothing to it, or it could be that we need to have something done about that, because I know in a lot of areas they put fencing up and they put canvas and other things to keep the dirt from blowing out of that area. But in those 3 large parcels, it's never been protected. It's basically open, and you can, when the wind blows, you can see the dirt rising up from those areas and hitting all those neighborhoods there. And like I said, it's mostly a lot of transit people as well, and you have low cost housing there mostly.
We have Rule 403, which is supposed to mitigate dust as the best control measure. So if it's a construction site, there are several options that the owner of the property has. They can fence it in to prevent offsite dust, and as well as soil stabilizers. So it sounds like maybe we should have our inspectors reach out to
And well,
get
what
some
I'll
more
do,
information.
I'll have either Vanjie or Monica reach out to you to get that address, and then let's see what we can do, okay?
Ms. Garcia.
As a follow-up to his comment, I think that Rule 403 is only for construction parcels. And so then it would think, correct me if I'm wrong, it would be considered a nuisance upon the city to try to mitigate the dust. 403 is only triggered when it's a mass construction project going on and there's a permit required by AQMD. And the only reason why I say that is because I had that same problem adjacent to my home where there was dust being generated by a housing development, and 403 was triggered for them to issue a permit for construction project over, I think, I'm not sure how much the acreages were, but for this one, if it's a vacant land that is owned by the city, then they should be required to mitigate the dust as their own property. But I don't think it would be triggered by 403. It will be triggered probably by something considered nuisance to all the surrounding residential properties.
It's hard to say. They'll have to go out and take a look at it because he mentioned that they demoed some buildings. And so it's hard to know if it's an active construction site or not.
Yeah, hi guys, this is Mike again. No, actually, the rule does require dust suppression for an active operation. So it would be during operating.
Great.
Open
And
piles, disturbed surfaces, things like that. Yeah.
thank you everyone for your comments on it. Just as a reminder, the agenda item is on CEQA, so if we could keep the focus on that. And I know there's concerns, so I'm glad that staff will be reaching out to address them.
Daphne always keeps us on task.
Thank you, Daphne.
Thank you. I'd like to move us along to the update on rendering.
And before we do that, did you want to check for public, if there's any public
Oh, I'm
comments on
sorry.
that?
I forgot that.
Um,
Yeah, do we have any public comment on this item?
Paul, anybody online for public comment?
Moses Huerta. Go ahead, Moses.
Can you hear me okay?
Can.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Moses Huerta. I'm a resident here in the city of Paramount. Thank you for this conversation on the CEQA. And
Excuse me,
the
Moses,
presentation
sorry.
is,
We don't have a timer up on the page, so we just ask you to kind of keep your own time. Thanks.
understood. I know the process. I'll keep it short and sweet. Thank you. The presentation was very welcome. I appreciate that. That gave me some clarity and understanding how the CEQA process is working through. I appreciate the questions that were asked in reference to adding the community members as we go forward in this conversation to addressing the CEQA implementation or effect and community as mine who are heavily impacted in cumulative impacts. I did want to ask if there was a little bit of clarification, as Mr. Yanis, to build off of his question, where if the CEQA is implemented and the project goes forward, and then furthermore, if there is an end of the permitting and the review, at that point is the reassessing, will rules be added or at that time be considered or modified to then start either mitigating or curtailing the newer or impacts to the community? I know as we go forward, cumulative, at least from my point of view, is where we need to really start going forward as the correct assessment is in the saturation. So I know the CEQA does what we want to keep addressing and try to keep it as transparent, but I'd like to have that little bit more clarification. If these projects go forward, especially if CEQA is waived, coming back to review these projects, if there is any review, are we implementing any, or is there anything implemented to then re-review or really address and start mitigating quickly and not make it a multi-year where residents or even those within the industry are being exposed to a newer, heavier exposure. Thank you all for the opportunity to speak.
Great. Thank you, Moses. This is Mike again. Yeah, so I don't think we really kind of touched on this, but there's a little additional nuance that Barbara had noted that if when evaluating the projects and you determine something is significant and you find you have ways to mitigate those impacts, and an additional document is actually created called a mitigation monitoring plan. This is the legal document that is enforceable. That document will list out those mitigations, who's responsible party, who enforces those mitigations. So yeah, there is some teeth after the process that's occurring. In addition, as I noted before, and Barbara noted, that the issuance of the air permit cannot be done unless that CEQA document supports the project that is being proposed. If the CEQA document does not, it does need to be revisited. This could cause a potentially new evaluation and recirculation and what have you of that document. So yes, there are some checks and balances occurring in this process.
Thank you. Appreciate the clarification.
You bet.
Thank you. Do we have any more public comment?
Not online at this time,
And I don't.
Madam Chair.
Thank you. I don't see anybody here either, so we can move on if that's okay. Next. We have an update on the rendering plans. There's a presentation today by Crystal Villanueva. Oh, she's online. Great. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Crystal Villanueva. I'm a supervisor with the Office of Compliance and Enforcement. I don't have a presentation. I'm just going to provide a brief update for you for the 5 rendering facilities subject to Rule 415. 4 of the 5 facilities are in the reclaim program. However, all 5 facilities are inspected regularly. So I'm going to start with Baker Commodities just to update you that the facility sought to modify the order for abatement to reopen its trap grease and wastewater processes. Last week, the hearing board granted this modified order. We have not received a hard copy of this yet, but we do know some of the conditions involved will be prohibiting trash or sludge in the open air pit, as well as disconnecting any fuel lines to the rendering cookers. Staff will continue to monitor this facility and respond to any complaints. We'll ensure they're operating in compliance with any rules, any permit conditions, and conditions under this modified order. And that's kind of the update for Baker. Moving on to Darling Ingredients. This is one of the large rendering facilities, the active rendering facility in the area. We conduct annual inspections, and during these inspections, they have demonstrated compliance with Rule 415. They continue to implement odor best management practices. A lot of these practices involve a lot of housekeeping requirements and holding times for their raw and cooked material. Also noteworthy that all of the processes and equipment here at this site, they are conducted within closed systems and within permanent total enclosures, which are vented to odor control systems. All the inspections, recent inspections, there have been no Rule 415 violations noted at this site. Moving on to Legacy, which is formerly D&D Disposal. This site is presently operating under the stipulated order for abatement. The only active operation at this site is that they process yellow grease. They ceased rendering operations back in August of 2021. They continue to submit their weekly reports on increments of progress and are also inspected regularly. The last inspection revealed no violations for Rule 415 at this site. I'm going to update you on Smithfield, which is former John. Officially, the facility is officially closed at this time. The last delivery of hogs and operation of the rendering equipment occurred in February of this year. Staff was on site yesterday. They observed that most of the equipment had been disassembled and removed from the site. The facility is currently auctioning off most of its equipment. The new property owner will take ownership in June of this year. They told us the only equipment that will remain on site is the backup emergency diesel generator and the refrigeration system. At this time, we don't know what the new owner plans to do with the property. However, we will continue to inspect the site until all equipment is removed, and we will go back to ensure that no new equipment is installed. The last rendering facility, which is the smallest, the only non-reclaimed rendering facility, is Coast Packing. And their focus is mainly edible rendering. They do have a very small inedible rendering operation, which has very low throughput. So they are exempt from a permanent total enclosure, but they are still required to meet like the BMPs. So we do inspect them regularly, and we have not observed any Rule 415 violations for this site as well. And we also don't really receive any complaints for this site. On that note, an update regarding complaints is we have since October of 2022 seen a drastic reduction in odor complaints for this area. Just this year alone, we are seeing single-digit numbers. So in January, the total complaint number received was 4, in February 2, in March 1, and so far this month also 1. That is a huge decrease. Like in 2021, we were averaging, sometimes 50 to 100 per month. And then last year was more like in the 20s. So we are seeing a significant reduction in that. In closing, inspectors will continue to conduct compliance inspections at these facilities, as well as respond to any complaints or notifications. We have inspectors that are assigned specifically to this area so that they can quickly respond to any complaints. Members of the community who are experiencing any odors or an air quality issue can report complaints through the South Coast AQMD website or through the mobile app or by calling 1-800-CUT-SMOG. And the complaint system is available 24 hours a day and 7 days a week. So thank you. That is my update.
Thanks, Crystal. Before we go, I just want to tell us we're amongst a celebrity. Daphne was the one that went before the hearing board to argue our side for Baker, and she did a great job. And I don't know if you want to add to what Crystal mentioned, but you're the lead attorney on that one.
Thank you. Nick Dwyer was on that also. And thank you for your presentation, Crystal. I don't have anything additional to add.
I was out there while actually Monica and Vanjie and I were out there yesterday. We did an EJ tour at the port, and we took them up to Exide and Baker being right across the street. And this was honestly the first time I did not smell anything when we got off the bus. It was actually refreshing. Usually when we take a busload of students, we get off the bus and it just hits you right away. Even on the bus, when you're traveling there, you can smell it, but when you get off, it could hit you. But yesterday, honestly, I said it was nothing. It was nothing compared to what it was before. So it's really good out there now.
Thank you for that. So I have a couple of questions, but I want to open it up to everybody else first, if that's okay. Are we still doing the note card thing? I don't see any. Okay. Oh, go ahead, Rafael.
Big shift. So, I thank you for the presentation and thank you for the update. I know it wasn't a presentation, but thank you for the updates. It's important. I'm just curious as to what that that modified order states now and what they're allowing them to do or not do. Especially as they, ramp up and maybe start up again. I've personally noticed a few really bad odor days. And I was curious as to if it was coming from DND or Baker, because I just didn't know the status of each of the plants. And I didn't really understand, wasn't as cooked of an odor, but it was, still bad. So I just wonder, what process, but I think they're called legacy now. I'll keep an eye out on that, and then I'll go ahead and let all the community members know up and down my block, so that way they can go ahead and re-up their calls to help, because I think because the I guess ongoing issues in the past, everyone's just stopped, and I think that's probably why there's a drastic decrease. But I'll encourage everyone to call in again. Thank you.
Thank you. Is your card misspelled? Is there an
Yes.
extra? Okay. That's okay.
We'll fix that.
It's fine, it's fine.
I almost said it wrong. I was like, no. Okay, Mr. Solach.
Just real quick, acknowledging what staff presented and the team about Farmers John. I actually worked 13 years at a Meals on Wheels nonprofit in Huntington Park. So driving through that area was horrific, and not knowing what AQMD even existed at the time or did, I think we would have had even more traffic of calls before that. But at least these last ones that did happen, just thankful of the update where we're at with the overall Farmers John. So I can relate to Mr. Torres getting off the bus smell, but it was pretty bad. So yeah, for what it's worth, on behalf of our community, and especially in that southeast part of Los Angeles, just thank you for the update, and we're very thankful that we don't have to smell that horrific smell anymore. Thank you.
Thank you. So what is it that eliminated the smell? Is it they're gone now? Is it they're enclosed? So, I mean, this is great news, but I'm just curious, like, why, what changed, what caused this great improvement?
Well, I could definitely say that, these rendering facilities are clustered together. And currently the only active operation is Darling. And since we've adopted Rule 415, they've had to implement new practices, retrofit equipment, update equipment to enclose things. So the whole purpose of the rule was to mitigate the odors. So whether it's by enclosing systems, as far as like, when stuff's being conveyed in, it's not open, there's a cover on top, or everything is done in an enclosed room, which is vented to control. So it's going to be a combination of the rule implementation and the fact that, only one of these is now really conducting these rendering operations, right? So I think I think the rule is the biggest impact, requiring these facilities to make these changes to mitigate odors. I do think it goes back to the rule.
That's great. Thank you for that. It just seems so simple just to close this stuff, right? So, and the community is really seeing the benefits. Thank you for that. So Smithfield, are they allowed, or are they no longer allowed to do any sort of rendering or so what is the rule for that place now? Like,
well, technically, I mean, their permits are still active. So technically they can render. However, they are not going to. They are going to just run their operations out of Sioux Falls, South Dakota. They are done operating in California. They chose to close down. So I don't really know much about who purchased the property. They kind of mentioned that it was a company that usually restores property. So we don't believe that a new rendering company is coming in, especially since they're selling off all of their equipment, because their equipment, they did install new equipment that was quite expensive, and their odor control equipment has been sold. So I don't believe a new company is going to come in and try to run the same type of operation there. And just to kind of go, yeah, we're good there. Sorry.
Okay, and just my final, just because I'm curious, what's yellow grease?
Yellow grease is like cooking oil that's old. So there's a difference between like trap grease and yellow grease. Yellow grease is a little bit cleaner, and they doesn't process too much. What they do is they bring it in, they separate the solids from the water, and they make like a little cake with the solids, and they ship that out, and they use it as biodiesel, and they clean whatever wastewater that it produces, and then they're able to discharge that or store it on site and have it shipped off. That's what yellow grease is.
Interesting. Thank you. I feel like Garcia has a question.
Thank you for that update. Do these rendering plans have permits?
Yes, they have permits for the rendering equipment themselves. They have permits for, like boilers or any afterburners, and they have permits for their wastewater system. So yeah, all 5 of these facilities have permits.
And in the permits, does it say how often the inspections are going to be anticipated? Is it like an annual thing, or is it unexpected inspections?
The permits do not state that. We conduct annual inspections, unannounced inspections regularly. We go on site for complaints if we need to, or if there's a notification submitted, like a breakdown. So we inspect these sites pretty annually for sure, and then regularly as needed for complaint response or breakdowns.
Okay, and just one last question. How many complaints from the community would it take for an inspector to go out and see what's going on?
Well, during normal business hours, 1 complaint is all it takes. We will go out and investigate. We try to investigate all of our complaints. So there isn't like a threshold.
Okay, good to know. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the update. I don't see any more questions. Are there any questions from the public?
Not at this time.
Okay, thank you so much. And I'll close public comment and move on to member updates. Are there any board member updates at this time?
Madam Chair, not update, but I just wanted to ask, so these meetings are going to be 100% in person. There's no hybrid option. I'm only asking because in the August meeting, I have a conflict on that Friday, so I would love to at least join remotely if possible, but if not, I also understand that.
So I'll defer to Daphne, but I believe, Daphne, correct me, I believe you can do it remotely, but we have to notice your location.
Okay.
And it has to be accessible to the public and ADA compliant. So, and you know how it is. So, is that right, Daphne?
Just asking. Thank you.
Yeah, that's the general rule, correct?
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. And this is just updates from where we are, what we represent, correct? All right. First of all, once again, good to be here in person. A couple of updates. Actually, let me give one first because I'm here on behalf of the American Lung Association. I'm a national board member now, so happy to take any feedback from this committee there and back and forth. Everyone learns from everyone, and it's always wonderful. The State of the Union or State of the Air report came out recently that's been put out by the American Lung Association for decades. It's an interesting report. You can find it online. If you can't, please feel free to contact me and I'll be happy to get you a copy. Just a couple of very interesting national stats. 120 million people in this country live in an area with unhealthy air. Better than before, 17.6 million people less than a few years before. So it's actually headed in the right direction, but what's not in the right direction is that communities where there's people of color 3.7 times as likely as white people to live in a county with at least 3 failing grades for air quality. So still a ways to go as a country. We are seeing a microcosm of that here in California. And unfortunately on that report, even though this agency does a wonderful job and California is trying very hard, we don't get very good grades on that report, obviously. And that just because of where we live and our population and all the other things we're fighting. But certainly without the efforts of everyone here, things would be far worse than they are. So kudos to everyone here for their work and making sure that we're headed in the right direction. And a quick follow-up from last year. You know, I'm a pediatrician for those of you who don't know. And the last year, it was very interesting. I was looking for data. You know, this group has worked with schools in terms of putting air filters in, and we're seeing the effects of that. I was never able, no matter how hard I tried, to get attendance data from those schools. And when you talk about environmental justice, that's a big one, because if you live in a community that might be underserved and already healthcare might be more limited and the air quality there is worse, and kids go to school less because they're sicker, because of the air quality, because of issues with healthcare, then what ends up happening is the school starts to lose funding, and you've just added another level of insult to that child. Bad air, harder to get healthcare access, and now the school has limited resources because there's less attendance, and a lot of school districts actually pay and fund schools based on the attendance in those schools. If anyone's able to get that data, I'm very curious for one reason, because if it's good data and it actually shows that it's cost effective for a school to put in the filters so that kids have better air and are healthier and can come to school, that school is going to get funded better, and it may be to the school's advantage to work on internal air quality. So just a little pitch for that, because it is a big deal, because in some areas that may be the only time that that kid's getting good air, breathing good air. And that's a terrible thought, but that's in the classroom, that might be the only time in their day that they're breathing good air. I mean, that's terrible, but it's a reality, and we need to help them and make sure. Bad lungs last for life. They develop less than healthy lungs. One of the other issues that comes up, and I know the AQMD addresses this, is time of day of pollution is not only critical for all the other reasons we mentioned, but it's also children as well. The times that they walk to school, the time that they try to do outdoor sports, and we want them to do those things, are very often times when the air is of maximal bad quality. And that's very unfortunate as well. And I know that this committee, and I know that the AQMD does look at times of day, but it becomes even more critical when you think of children's health. So I am happy to work with anyone here who knows anyone who can get me some of that data. I don't want to secretly publish it and become famous. I just want to find a compelling reason. I don't care about being famous. That's probably, that's not a good idea in this world anyway. But I do care about providing compelling proof to the powers that be that putting in and making sure that internal air at schools for children is not only good for the children, good for their health, but is also cost effective and of benefit to the school financially. So let me know if you know anyone.
Dr. Al-Hassan, thank you very much for that, and for those stats you gave on state of the air. And to address your last question, not so much on the data, but I think you'd be shocked to find out how difficult it is for us to get into schools to put in air filters. So the smaller districts are a lot easier to work with. And I won't name the one district that's very difficult because they're the second largest in the nation. And you can figure out from there who it is. But we have millions of dollars to give to that school district for air filters in the classrooms. And it is extremely difficult. Now, I understand they're a large bureaucracy. I understand that, there's there's sub-districts, but we are having a heck of a time giving them money. And it's not because there's any strings tied to it, because there's not, but, look out for the kids, because that's our future.
let me know if you ever want me to come and talk on that with the group. It becomes very embarrassing to a politician or to any of these stakeholders when you actually say, look, you really don't want to do this for the kids. It becomes very hard to argue back. I've leveraged that many times in my life, and I'm happy to do so on behalf of this committee and on behalf of the kids of that school district. So give me a call and I'll be happy to testify. I'm an asthma doctor. The data is very clear. As a matter of fact, if they don't do it, we can actually hold them to task on behalf of the American Disabilities Act, because of what they're doing in the environment is actually perpetuating a chronic illness. They're actually in violation of the American Disabilities Act, and I'll be happy to go there and testify on that behalf as well. Yes, I pull every string and I'm happy to do so. So please feel free to call me and I'll be happy to talk with you on that.
As I tell my staff, watch out what you ask for. So
I understand.
calling you.
And that's fair. That's fair.
Yeah, Mr. Rafael.
Hi, just a few updates. I did attend a few meetings. One was just most recently was the DTSC's Exide cleanup workshop that ultimately was taking place, and there was good community input and feedback. And apparently, there's been some challenges, and hopefully DTSC is getting it all straightened out. It looks like they're retooling with new project management team, and we're hopeful that their process can be more streamlined. I've made recommendations and they've been open to some of those recommendations, and hopefully there'll be more improvements, shortly. And then on the AB 617 front for the East LA Boyle Heights and West Commerce, we've reached the 5-year mark, which is halfway through the 10-year program. And I've touched base with other CSC communities in the first year, specifically Wilmington, North Long Beach area. And I'm really hopeful that we could move forward. Right now, there was some voting of funds that took place 2-3 years ago now, and we still haven't had implementation of any of those programs, but staff has informed me that they're hopeful that they can get at least one of the voted on programs implemented by summer, and maybe possibly the other, one of which is in-house air filtration for the residents in and around the Boyle Heights, East LA, and West Commerce area, as well as implementation, although we haven't heard, or at least weren't able to participate in, or at least I wasn't able to participate so far in the comments, but the zero truck emissions for the CSC, the vision there is hopefully that, we can offer up some grant funding for some of the local businesses that are operating within the CSC with some incentive funding so that they can get zero emission trucks, things like bobtail trucks. And even though the big rig trucks, I know, take a lot of capital, and CARB is just AQMD is just between CARB and AQMD. I think it was CARB, I'm sorry. Implementing a pilot program with 2 fleets of 50 trucks. Or is it AQMD?
I'll say we're in partnership.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Thank you. Thanks, Derek. And so hopefully we can get small mom and pop shops to invest in zero emission trucks. Thank you.
I think on that note, on the zero emission for the 617 communities, The technology is there for the bobcasting for the smaller trucks. It's not there for the bigger ones, long haul. And that's going to take time, but it's just eventually going to get there. But, whenever a company, whether it be in a 617 community or not a 617 community, they're still eligible for Carl Moyer money that we give out. And that is, every year we're oversubscribed on that, but we give out tens of millions of dollars every year on that. I'm not supposed to advocate or for support on a piece of legislation, but I'm just going to say I can educate you and tell you that we have a bill that we're sponsoring in Sacramento that will actually increase incentive money for AB 2766 by about $50 million. And I was in Sacramento on Wednesday, and that had its first committee meeting, and it got out of committee. So we're hoping it goes over to the assembly and, on the Senate side, and gets passed over and on to the governor. And then your other point on the, oh my God, I'm old. What was the first thing you were talking about? Because I did have something to say about
Yeah,
that.
so it was in the resident air filtration system.
Oh, no, it wasn't that. Anyways, I forgot. Exide. Thank you.
Yes, I'm sorry, DTSC and the Exide
Yes.
workshop.
So on that issue, as you know, Exide is a very sad example of for failure.
Yeah.
It was failure.
Yeah,
Let's be
totally.
honest.
Totally.
Let's be honest.
Agreed.
It was failure on multiple sides, not just one side. But we're still active on that to a certain extent. Really, it's Angela's former employer, DTSC, that is still involved in that. But I think you said it right. There's a change over there, and hopefully things will change. It's a tragedy that the funding is not there, but hopefully the funding will be there for an expanded cleanup, because not just the existing footprint that they want to clean up, they got expanded farther, especially in the Southeast cities. So I think the Southeast cities are the ones that really didn't get as much of the dollars that they should have gotten.
Understood. And just so everyone knows, I'm thankful that, the legislature and the governor's office, in conjunction with Cal EPA, has at least, finally, after, years of, us, the community being on them about really applying for and making this a Superfund site so that we can get federal dollars, US EPA Superfund site designation. And that's moving through the process, although it's going to be very slow. But of course, we've had 40 years of slow. And so we're hopeful just, a few more years and, that funding would become available. But again, going back to the Carl Moyer, that, we've always understood that the Carl Moyer Fund is one that promotes zero emission trucks and vehicles. However, the thing about this particular CSC and the funding source, which has already been appropriated, but I'm hoping that program opens up quickly by AQMD staff to allow the designated local mom and pops within the community to apply for some of these zero emission bobtail trucks and whatnot that. And
now I
outreach.
remember what I really wanted to say.
Go ahead, say it.
So you talked about the A617 implementation money. The proposed Senate budget just got released on Monday or Tuesday this week. And it essentially guts the 617 implementation money. It goes from $250 million to $50 million. And they're going to give $50 million to, I think it's 17 communities statewide, which is a tragedy because that's not going to do anything. It's not. So hopefully the Assembly and the governor's office will come to their senses and fully fund 617 so it could actually do what it's supposed to be doing. And that is addressing those inequities in those communities and making sure that we fund it well enough to make a significant change.
Thank you. I see Mr. Smith.
You know, I just wanted to see if I could get Dr. Alexander's contact information either after the meeting or now. Okay. Okay, thank you very much.
Some good networking to create some good change, I hope. It's awesome. I don't see any. Oh, I do. Mr. Arredondo, go ahead.
I'm sorry to hear about the fact that they're going through with getting out the 617 because it's doing a lot of great things for our area. I was going to talk about that, the fact that there's a lot of great things happening in our area. The only issue is that our 617 area only goes from Avenue 48 to the eastern boundary of Riverside County, and so a lot of the metropolitan areas are more populated areas like Indio and Palm Springs and Palm Desert are not included. Although there are some projects going on in Desert Mirage, Rancho Mirage, sorry, that they're trying to get business owners to participate in going green and using materials, remodeling their facilities so that they will use green materials. And they're also building housing for homeless people using, I'm trying to remember what the term they use, but it's green material that they're producing, and with no environmental concerns. And so, but there are meeting some difficulties because of the fact that the permitting that they're having to go through with the cities, it's like about $7,000 for the permit, and that puts an extra strain on the business's desire to go green. But there's a lot of interest now because of 617 and everything been happening, that people are getting more into it, and so it's catching on. And of course, you've heard about the Salton Sea. There's great plans for the Salton Sea. It looks like finally everybody got together and they're pulling in the same direction. One of the benefits that also is going to come from that is the fact that the new river, which is one of the most polluted, probably the most polluted river in the United States, they'll be using water from there, pouring it into the Salton Sea, because the salt in the Salton Sea is so high that it will help clean that water, and they'll keep the circulation. And so it's whether they say it's going to work, we'll just have to keep an eye on it. But they're going to build, they're going to make Salton Sea into two lakes, one for recreational and fishing and things that for public use, and then the other is for keeping the a place to circulate the water in. And so if it works, it'll be a great boon for the area. And again, the other thing also is we're getting a benefit, which also affects Imperial County, is the geothermal plants, because nobody really thought about it, but they've put up 7, I think, and they're working on 2 more plants, geothermal plants. And one of the byproducts of those plants is water, because as they draw the steam from the ground to generate electricity, that the water, when it cools down, that steam becomes water. And so they're also going to build a sanctuary for the wildlife out there as well. So it's exciting news. And again, AQM is right in the middle of it and doing all those things. And again, the staff is very involved with that. And we're also starting up the filtration. We're going to provide air filters for the people who live in that community. The AQM has approved, I think, about 20 providers for this, and people will be able to order directly from them. And they will receive a grant for covering that cost, and for 3 years of filters, I guess. And so that's really going to help the people in the area with the air quality. And again, that's an area which is high in asthma. And hopefully, I'd like to see, maybe we could study the effects of putting those in homes in that area. The other thing that we're working on is the paving of roads that is going to also, especially in the mobile homes where you have a lot of our socially economic challenged families living, and they have, you know, probably the ones that have the least amount of health coverage, and yet they're in an area which is highly contaminated, and also the dust particles that are generated on a daily basis. And so they're going to be doing more paving on some of those parks and mobile parks. And so it's getting really, I mean, there's a lot of things happening out there that are very good. And again, I always credit AQMD and its staff for being out there and, you know, pushing and being involved and giving us the information. That's the most important thing. Data, having the data so we can speak up and you know, bring up the issues and bring up the solutions. And I think that's it.
Oh, thank you, Manuel. I do want to say that Coachella Valley is obviously important, and Eastern Coachella Valley too, also obviously. Our board chair, Chair Delgado, she has asked us to go to two places. We typically have our board meetings here. She has asked us to go outside of outside the headquarters here, and one is to go to Coachella Valley, Eastern Coachella Valley, to have our meeting out there with the people. The other location is in the San Fernando Valley. So we're going to be scheduling our board meetings where the two board members and Supervisor Hagman was here earlier. We're going to be traveling out there and have our board meetings so the people can actually attend. We know that coming from Coachella Valley it's a long drive to come here. So we're going out there to have the opportunity for them to hear from us, but also hear from them too.
We don't have date. Okay. But thank you for all the comments and updates. I'd like to, we don't have to do public comment for this section, right? I can move on to the public comment period. Okay, do we have anybody waiting to provide comments today?
None at this time, Madam Chair.
Okay.
Move to adjourn.
Yeah, we can adjourn. Just wanted to update all that our next meeting is August 25th at 12 o'clock here. And yeah, we'll adjourn at 1:45. Thank you. Oh, you're fine.
Yeah, your expense claims. Don't forget to turn your expense claims. Because then I get on Vanjie. Vanjie, where's the expense claims so I can sign them?